I stepped off a very high curb, fell to the ground, and met some very hard concrete, and I broke my femur, and I couldn't move. And I was laying there in the rain in the street for almost 2 hours, waiting for an ambulance to come. And what was extraordinary was
in this episode of Insights at the Edge, I am so pleased and honored that our guest is Frank Ostaseski. Frank is a pioneer in compassionate end-of-life care and a respected Buddhist teacher. He co-founded the Zen Hospice Project, America's first Buddhist hospice, and established the Metta Institute to train healthcare professionals and caregivers. He's taught at Harvard Medical School and the Mayo Clinic, and he's the author of the book, The 5 Invitations, Discovering What Death Can Teach Us About Living Fully. Frank, welcome.
Welcome, thanks friend. A lot, Tammy. Nice to be with you. And let me say, I want to begin by thanking you for your own wisdom, but also how you gather wisdom and share it with the world. So thank you for doing that. Yeah.
Thank you, Frank. And this is the first time we've ever had the chance to have a conversation like this and record it, a podcast conversation. And if it's okay with you, I want to jump right to my sense of the heart of the matter, which is as I was familiarizing myself with your work, what I learned is that you've distilled into these 2 questions what's most alive for people as they face the end of their life. The question, not so much, the regrets of the dying, this or that. No, that's not what you have distilled down to this core. It's, am I loved, and have I loved well? And this was really meaningful to me. I started reflecting on these 2 questions deeply. And I thought, well, when it comes to loving well, I think I could do a lot more. And I have some ideas about that. And I want to know more about what you know about that. But then when I thought, am I loved? I thought, that's a lot more mysterious. I don't know. What can I even do about that? So that's where I want to start. I want to hear from you, your insights on these 2 questions that are on our hearts when we face dying.
Yeah, well, thank you. First of all, let me just say that's a kind of paraphrasing of what I've learned from being with people. And they're not evaluative. They aren't, did I do well? Did I pass the test? But what's my experience? Am I loved? How do I even ascertain that? As you know, we worked with a lot of people had been living on the streets, folks who, had complex lives, let's say, really complex lives. And often they came to us and they were just glad to be warm, dry, and inside, And so then they came into this environment at Zen Hospice where they discovered a certain kind of kindness that they maybe didn't know in their lives. And so this question really came up for them, am I loved? I feel loved by you guys. I don't know if I was loved before this. I feel loved by you guys. Meaning the Zen Hospice volunteers. So yeah, am I loved? Am I loved, Did I love well? Again, not evaluative, but I know my grandchildren love me. I know I've learned to love myself over the years. And I've done my very best to express that love. In my case, mostly through service, through trying to be of some use and value to people, to this world. So those are just my first impressions in response to your question. Do you feel loved? How about you?
I think it's an arena that I want to grow in. And I think some of it requires an increase in receptivity, but also, and I'd love to hear more what you have to say about this as well, what I notice is that when I focus on loving others, there's like this interesting reciprocity. I suddenly feel more loved too, because they mirror it back immediately. It's just, it's like you give it and it comes right back. It's interesting.
I don't know, a couple of years ago, I was in Mexico City for a holiday with a dear friend of mine. And the very first night, we were walking through the big, plaza there in Mexico City. And I stepped off a very high curb, fell to the ground, and met some very hard concrete. And I broke my femur. And I couldn't move. And I was laying there in the rain in the street for almost 2 hours, waiting for an ambulance to come. And what was extraordinary was the people who came around me, people who were just walking through the plaza I didn't know. One, of course, everybody wanted to help me stand up. I knew I shouldn't do that. So one placed a piece of cardboard under my head. Another took her shawl off and wrapped it over me. This was really moved me. It really moved me. Later, I was in the hospital, and I don't like hospitals. I don't trust them, honestly. And I get scared, and I feel helpless. And I called a buddy of mine, her, Joan Halifax, Roshi Joan Halifax, and she'd just come from being with His Holiness. And I said, "What'd you learn?" And he said, she said that he was teaching that altruism is the balancing factor for helplessness. And I really got it. It landed for me. And so from that moment, I just started practicing altruism when everybody was taking care of me. And not just saying thank you to them, but receiving their care. And it has something to do with what you were just saying, this receptivity that we have. So, some home health aide who maybe had 2 weeks of training and probably made a couple of dollars an hour. I said to her, I'm so glad for your training because you're positioning me in bed and now I can rest. I'll be able to sleep tonight. And she got very proud and happy. But what I realized that it wasn't just about saying thank you, it was about receiving someone's care, receiving somebody's love. Yeah. So I don't know. This is a never-ending exploration for me, Tammy, actually.
I'm curious, though, because you train and have historically trained caregivers, how this notion of helping people feel loved infuses the attitude and the behaviors of a caregiver, potentially. What kind of training helps people with that?
I think learning to touch their own suffering with some degree of kindness, getting to know their own what's difficult for them, their own losses, their own fears, etc. And that enables them to build an empathetic bridge to the person that they're caring for. And then that individual feels met, and their heart opens. And, we don't have to teach them how to get out of that situation. We have to meet them there. Yeah, we have to meet them empathetically in that moment. And we can only do that if we've done our homework. If we haven't, we're just guessing. Yeah.
Now, you yourself have been meeting your own difficult territory. I was reading in preparation for this conversation that you had a heart attack several years ago and said you found yourself on the other side of the sheets, so to speak. And just before and preparing for our conversation together, you and I in discussion, you mentioned that you've had some minor strokes as well over the last few years. And I'm curious how those experiences have perhaps furthered your understanding of what's really needed in these kinds of situations now that you've been on the other side of the sheets. When
I had heart challenges, I had a triple bypass surgery, a big deal. They cut you open and spread you like a crab. And when I came to the recovery unit, if you will, after the surgery, a dear friend of mine who's a meditation teacher was with me, and I couldn't breathe well. I was still intubated. And a respiratory therapist came into the room and said, "Let's take out those tubes and see if you can breathe." Literally, that's what he said. And I had a piece of paper and I wrote to my friend, "I'm scared. I'm really scared." And he said, "Follow your breath." Well, I couldn't follow my breath because I was intubated. Then he said, "Sense your body, sense your feet." Well, I couldn't sense my feet because still anesthesia was still running through my body. So I grabbed him, actually, and I pulled him close to me, Tammy, and I just put my ear on his cheek so I could listen to his breathing rhythm. And as he would breathe, I would stabilize, I could stabilize my fear in a way. So I think being able to meet fear, our own, but also not giving more fear to people as they find themselves in these scary situations is really important. A very famous Tibetan teacher called me after my heart attacks. I won't say his name, but I knew he'd had a heart attack. And so I thought, oh, he'll know, right? He'll know what to do. He'll know how to deal with the depression and the fear and the beauty that was part of that experience. And so I asked him, what do you do, and how do you do it? And I thought he'd give me some practice or some esoteric teaching of some kind. And, there was a pause on the phone, and then he said, well, I think it's good to have a heart. And if you have a heart, you should expect it will have problems. And then he paused for a moment, then he hung up. That was it. No esoteric teaching, no great new practice, just that. And afterwards, I thought, he's right. If we have a heart, if we have a human life, we should expect that we'll have problems. Who told us otherwise? So meeting this in myself, meeting this in other people, I think this is the way that, we begin to understand something about our innate vulnerability, which of course isn't just weakness, is for me one of the most beautiful of our human qualities because it allows the beauty and horror of the world to impress itself on our souls. And honestly, that's a lot of what happens for me when I'm with people at the end of life. I just hang out with them. I don't have any solutions. And I just try to be real. And that includes my extending to them my own kindness and how I've experienced something like what they're experiencing.